The Vatican catacombs hold an absolute silence, cloaked in shadows and secrets. For centuries, only a chosen few have walked on that sacred ground, immersed in a labyrinth where each stone seems to whisper forgotten tales. The narrow corridors form a maze that emanates the scent of death and ancient dampness, and the flickering torchlight casts distorted shadows on the walls. Walking there feels like traversing a valley where the past lives in every crack, and the air seems poisoned by hidden secrets. It's not uncommon to feel watched, even when all is quiet. It's said that the Vatican hides the catacombs from prying eyes not out of mere secrecy, but from a greater need for containment. There, among sealed crypts and hidden chambers, rest not only martyrs and popes, but fragments of something that should never have been brought to light. Secret records contain descriptions of strange phenomena occurring in the depths, lights igniting without flame, muffled screams echoing from nowhere. These are manifestations that defy logic, disturb faith, and leave even the most devout exorcists trembling with fear. Few dare to descend alone. Those who do are never the same. Those who return speak in trembling voices of a darkness that seems to take shape, of visions that only deepen the tension within the church. Rumors suggest that the very walls of the catacombs are impregnated with a malevolent presence, resistant to blessings and exorcisms. Every inch of the space feels imbued with an ancient power, and those who descend there have the unsettling sensation of treading on profane ground, even beneath the Vatican. The existence of secret tunnels and additional chambers, unrecorded on official maps, is a source of speculation among the Vatican's guardians. There are said to be areas within the catacombs where access has been forbidden for centuries, sealed with crosses and symbols carved in stone. These places are guarded with sacred fervor, yet no one fully explains what they contain. Perhaps it is to protect the world from what lies there, or to prevent anyone from releasing something that should remain imprisoned forever. During Marco's exorcism, it was discovered that an energy manifests itself in the presence of acts of faith, as if drawn to them. Many believe it is this energy that makes the catacombs so dangerous, threatening to consume those who dare disturb its dark tranquility. And it is this very energy that, over the years, has secretly strengthened, resisting the Church's efforts to expel it. What causes the greatest fear among the few who know the truth is that, even with centuries of attempts, the Church has never managed to completely purify those corridors. In the Vatican, it's known, even in whispers, that the evil contained there is not ordinary. It is an ancient presence, something that has withstood even the Church itself, and in silence, waits patiently to reveal itself. The rumors and stories make the site one of the most feared among the faithful, and this is why few dare descend without a direct order. Those who do are regarded with admiration, but also with a certain distance. They know they will not return the same, for the catacombs demand a high price from those who dare to challenge their secrets. Among the Vatican's corridors, where ancient walls safeguard forbidden documents and secrets, a legend circulates in whispers among the Church's highest members: the prophecy of the Antichrist. This ancient prophecy, hidden within the lines of Vatican records, speaks of an unholy birth that would mark the beginning of an era of darkness. Only a select few know of the legend, but those who have studied it believe the event is already in motion, marked by signs that only trained eyes can recognize. The threat of the Antichrist is not something spoken of openly. The prophecy, kept in absolute secrecy, is so old that many believe it to have originated in the early years of Christianity. It describes that the Antichrist would not be born among the common, but in sacred ground, in a place meant to be pure. This is the reason for so much fear and secrecy. If something like this were to happen, it would mean that even the Church, in all its glory, could be corrupted by a force beyond any exorcism or blessing. In that ancient text, it reads that the Antichrist would possess the strength of 1,000 demons and the knowledge of ages. Those aware of this prophecy live in constant vigilance, seeking signs of its fulfillment. They carefully observe the youngest, study each strange phenomenon, and catalog unexplained events as parts of a dark puzzle. With each suspicion, they perform rituals and exorcisms to ward off whatever might be the source of this threat. Still, many believe they are only delaying the inevitable. The prophecy claims that the Antichrist will come when the defenses of faith are at their weakest. Marco's exorcism reignited fear of the prophecy among the Church's leaders. When Sister Agatha became the target of an inexplicable event, conceiving without memory of any contact, panic was absolute. The possibility that the Antichrist could be born within the Church itself shook even the most skeptical, rekindling debates and putting many convictions at risk. If the devil planted his seed there, What would this mean for the future of faith and the world? Internal conflicts quickly arose, with some wishing to eliminate the sister and the baby immediately, while others advocated for a more cautious investigation. But the most fervent voices feared that the birth of the Antichrist was already underway. They believed that destroying the baby might provoke the forces of evil, triggering an even greater disaster. At the same time, keeping him alive represented a risk few were willing to take. The Vatican, divided, fears the fate that the prophecy's words seem to announce. Those familiar with the details of this prophecy live with tormented souls, caught between the duty to protect the Church and the fear that their faith may not be strong enough. The Antichrist, born from Sister Agatha's womb, would threaten the very essence of the Church. What would they do then if the prophecy truly came to pass? These questions consume them, and in secret, each lives as though each day were the last moment before the inevitable rise of evil. Marco D'Angelo was a promising young seminarian, but there was something unsettling in his gaze in the days leading up to his exorcism. The priests and seminarians noticed the changes. He began to walk alone through the corridors, whispering to the walls and looking to the sky as if something horrific was looking back. There was in him a growing restlessness, as if he carried an invisible burden. But no one suspected the gravity of what was to come. Only after his terrifying screams echoed through the night did the first rumors of a possible possession begin to emerge. When they finally decided to take Marco to the catacombs, tension spread through the congregation. Those who saw him swear his eyes were vacant, as if his soul was absent, trapped somewhere far beyond the world of the living. He was chained to an iron gurney, a drastic but necessary measure to prevent the entity possessing him from causing more destruction. Every step into the catacombs led the group to a more terrifying depth, and the air grew heavy, oppressive, as if even the shadows sensed the horror they were about to face. The first encounter with the entity was overwhelming. Marco, restrained on the gurney, arched his body unnaturally as guttural roars emerged from his throat. The voice that came from him was not human, a mix of screams and profanities in a lost language. For Father Mancini, who led the ritual, that moment was marked by a sense of helplessness. He realized he was facing something far beyond his understanding and experience. The entity seemed to mock the traditional rites, displaying contempt for faith. When the malevolent presence revealed its identity, Asmodeus, the Prince of Lust, the atmosphere transformed entirely. The candles extinguished, and the stench of sulfur filled the space, nearly suffocating. Darkness became an extension of the demon, enveloping those present and weakening their resolve. Each prayer seemed only to strengthen the entity, as if feeding off their despair. Those who witnessed the event would never forget the feeling of absolute vulnerability that seized them all. The attacks grew more violent, with objects flying through the air, guards being hurled against walls, and even Sister Agatha, with her vast knowledge of forbidden texts, feared for her life. The forces trying to maintain order in that room began to falter, and the sense that they were all doomed pressed more heavily with each moment. Mancini realized he was in a battle for survival, and Asmodeus's dominance only grew. The demon knew each person's weaknesses and seemed to toy with them. In the end, exhausted and without hope, the only alternative seemed to be to try to take Marco to the hidden chamber. They needed to seal the demon somehow before he completely shattered everyone's faith. Each step toward the unknown felt like descending into an abyss of madness and perdition, where every movement was a risky dance with death. Marco, in his convulsions, seemed to cry for help, but Asmodeus had locked his soul in a place where not even faith dared search. Asmodeus has long been one of the most feared figures among demonologists. In ancient texts, he is described as the demon of lust, the corrupter of souls, and his power is proportional to the human weakness he exploits. The oldest records speak of Asmodeus as a prince of hell, one who had direct contact with the fallen angels and learned the darkest secrets of human nature. He is known for using desire and temptation as weapons, leading even the devout to ruin. Asmodeus's presence in the catacombs is considered an affront to the very foundations of the Vatican. He is not just any demon, but an entity that feeds on human frailties, doubts, and temptations. His name is avoided at all costs, as speaking it is nearly tantamount to invoking him. Vatican exorcists know that dealing with him is an immense challenge, and few emerge unscathed from a confrontation with the Prince of Lust. It is said that once he marks someone, they are never the same. During Marco's exorcism, Asmodeus manifested in a terrifying way, taking control of the seminarian's body with a force that surpassed any exorcism previously encountered. His words were a mixture of mockery and disdain, and his presence was felt by everyone present as a heavy, oppressive shadow. He knew that all feared his nature, and he used every weak point in Mancini and Agatha's faith to undermine their convictions. The more they prayed, the stronger he seemed to grow, proving that he was not a force easily subdued. Above all, Asmodeus is a master of manipulation. He knows each person's hidden desires, doubts, and yearnings, making him an almost invincible adversary. In the Vatican, his presence is feared, for it's known that he can corrupt even the purest. There are stories of exorcists who, in their last words, confess to being tempted by him, even knowing the risks. Some even abandon their faith, driven mad by the power Asmodeus wielded over their minds. He represents a force that cannot be defeated by prayer alone. The struggle against him is not only physical, but also spiritual and psychological. In confronting Asmodeus, Mancini and Agatha were putting their own souls at risk, knowing the demon could manipulate their minds and corrupt their hearts. The Prince of Lust is a force of pure darkness, feeding on fear and doubt, and his presence in the Vatican is a constant threat. He is living proof that even the most sacred places can harbor the utmost evil. At the end of the confrontation, Asmodeus left a clear warning. He was only the beginning. His words echoed through the catacombs, leaving a mark of terror on everyone present. They knew he wasn't bluffing, as his power was immense. The Vatican, with all its resources, felt the weight of its fragility before a force like his. And as the Church tried to rebuild its confidence, there was a latent sense that the true battle had yet to come. Among the Vatican's most closely guarded secrets is the existence of a secret order, known only as the Shadow Guardians. This order is composed of exorcists and monks chosen from among the bravest and most devout, with a mission to protect the Vatican from the horrors that reside in its depths. No one knows exactly how many there are or where they live, but rumors of their existence circulate within the walls, especially among the upper echelons. They are men and women prepared to confront evil, even when it manifests in unbearable ways. The Shadow Guardians are chosen from a young age, undergoing years of training in exorcism practices and ancient rituals. Their knowledge extends beyond sacred texts, including writings banned by the Church and ancient defensive rituals nearly lost to time. Those accepted into the order never again lead a normal life. They are treated with respect and a certain distance, as everyone knows the price they pay to keep the Vatican safe. But this isolation also means that when something goes wrong, they are on their own. These guardians are the first to be called when there is an uncontrollable demonic manifestation. They are tasked with exploring the catacombs and confronting the oldest and most powerful entities residing there. During the incident with Marco, several guardians were sent to contain the situation, though few knew what they would truly face. It is not uncommon for many to fail to return from such missions, vanishing without a trace or losing their minds from what they confronted. The order is known for being extremely disciplined and silent, but the encounter with Asmodeus brought a weight that shook even the most experienced. Some members speak, in secret, of a feeling of exhaustion, as if the forces of darkness are growing stronger and more resistant with each new exorcism. Even so, they remain steadfast in their mission, as they know their duty is not a choice but a responsibility that few could bear. They carry the invisible scars of the battles they have fought. Those who enter the order are instructed never to speak of their missions, not even among themselves. Silence is a rule, and vigilance is constant. Each member knows that the mission may mean the loss of their own soul, but faith and discipline keep them standing. Yet recently, some of the guardians have sensed that something has changed. The demonic forces seem bolder, as if aware that something greater is approaching. This keeps everyone on edge, with a silent tension growing among them. Asmodeus's presence was a critical moment for the order, as it highlighted the limitations of even the most seasoned members. They now wonder if they are truly prepared for what lies ahead. After all, if a demon prince like Asmodeus destabilized them so deeply, what would happen if something even worse escaped from the depths? The Shadow Guardians know they cannot falter, but doubt is beginning to spread among them. And secretly, many fear that the order may not withstand the next encounter. The relic of St. Peter is more than just a religious symbol. Few know that this fragment of the Apostles' Cross is guarded not only for its historical and spiritual value, but for a power that not everyone understands. Those few who have held this relic describe a sensation of intense warmth and light, as if a sacred force resides within that small piece of wood. It is said that only those with unshakable faith can touch it. Otherwise, the relic repels the impure, causing anything from burns to panic attacks. For centuries, The relic has been kept in a wooden box with reinforced locks, sealed with blessings and prayers from specific altars within the Vatican. Those who watch over it believe the object possesses an unusual energy, a sort of barrier against the darkness that constantly seeks to invade the Vatican's walls. It is believed that in the relic's presence, malevolent entities are weakened, as if the essence of St. Peter remains alive and vigilant, protecting the place and the souls of those who guard it. However, this protection is not infallible. Many of the relic's guardians report that its sacred energy weakens when the faith of its bearer is shaken. Exorcists of past generations noted that the relic at times became unresponsive when held by those whose souls had already been affected by evil. In such cases, using the relic becomes dangerous, as the connection with St. Peter is lost. The Church, aware of this, employs the relic only in extreme moments, so as not to exhaust its power. When Father Mancini brought the relic to Marco, he knew he was risking his own life and faith. The relic seemed to vibrate in his hands, as if reacting to Asmodeus's presence. The golden light emanating from it was the only hope in the midst of the darkness. However, Mancini himself felt an inner conflict. Was he worthy of holding it at that moment, with his doubts and fears? It was as if the relic was testing him, reflecting his own uncertainties back at him. After the exorcism, the Vatican realized that something had changed in the relic. Its light had dimmed, and the warmth it emitted had lessened. The theologians and priests studying the artifact feared that the battle with Asmodeus had drained part of its strength. The question whispered among them was, had the relic been tainted by being used in a battle against a demon prince? This fear leads many to believe that perhaps St. Peter's sacred power is, indeed, under threat. The future of the relic is uncertain, and the Vatican debates what to do with it. If St. Peter's power truly fades, what will remain to protect them against an even greater evil? The uncertainty regarding its protective capacity has become a burden for the Vatican, which now faces the possibility of losing one of its greatest spiritual weapons. They know this relic is not just a symbol, but a shield against hell itself, a shield that may be breaking. The circle of protection is an ancient and powerful ritual, an extreme measure used to seal away evil. This rite has been kept secret for centuries, known only to a select group of Vatican exorcists. Creating a circle of protection requires more than candles, salt, and prayers. It demands a sacrifice of faith and mental resilience that few can sustain. It is said that this ritual drains the energy of those who perform it, leaving a spiritual mark that brings them closer to the darkness they combat. Each line drawn in the circle represents a sacred barrier, a personal vow of sacrifice to contain the evil. When Father Mancini and Sister Agatha drew the circle around Marco, both knew the risk they were taking. The connection between the exorcist and the circle is so intense that he begins to share the horrors of the possessed, feeling the weight of malign influences with every word he utters. It is a spiritual burden, a kind of pact with martyrdom itself. Yet there is a hidden price to perform this circle. It demands a sacrifice, a complete surrender to faith. During the confrontation with Asmodeus, Mancini and Agatha realized that, for the circle to be completed, someone would have to surrender their own light, allowing the demonic presence to drain part of their soul. This act creates a dangerous link between the exorcist and the entity, rendering them vulnerable to malign influences. It is a choice that requires courage, for in offering their faith, the exorcist risks their own sanity. When Mancini raised the relic of St. Peter at the center of the circle, he felt his soul being pulled into a deep darkness. The demon's force pressed against the circle's barrier, threatening to corrupt his faith. Sister Agatha, standing beside him, held the ritual book with trembling hands, aware that they both stood on the edge of an abyss. With each word spoken, they lost a bit more of themselves. They were offering their lives, their souls, as a tribute to sacred protection. The circle of protection is a decisive measure, but not a permanent one. Once the ritual is completed, those who participated in the sacrifice must undergo purification, or their spirits would remain vulnerable. Mancini and Agatha emerged from the ritual with invisible marks, something that distanced them from others, as though a piece of darkness itself had followed them. The Church, knowing the risks, tries to rehabilitate exorcists after each ritual, but with every sacrifice, there is an irreparable loss. The Vatican understands the importance of this ritual and the responsibility of those who perform it. Only the most experienced exorcists are permitted to conduct the circle of protection, as they bear the weight of the sacrifice. It is a burden few accept, but one necessary to keep demonic forces at bay. For Mancini and Agatha, this ritual changed who they were forever, leaving marks they would carry for the rest of their lives. They had sacrificed part of their souls to contain the evil, but they knew it still awaited the moment to return. The Brotherhood of Forbidden Texts is one of the Vatican's darkest secrets. Composed of monks, priests, and scholars, this brotherhood has the mission of preserving and understanding manuscripts that contain knowledge deemed too dangerous for the common public. These texts describe rituals, formulas, and incantations that, if misused, could unleash evil upon the world. Many of these writings have been hidden for centuries, sealed in chambers accessible only to the Brotherhood's members. Sister Agatha is one of the guardians of these texts, and over years of study, she has learned about demonic entities and ancient rituals. She knows that this knowledge walks a thin line between protection and ruin. Her access to forbidden texts has given her a power that few understand, but it has also condemned her to carry secrets that set her apart from others. Every word read and every page turned represents a risk to her soul, but she understands that this knowledge is necessary to combat evil. Members of the Brotherhood live in spiritual and emotional isolation. They know that the knowledge they carry is like a curse, a door left open to darkness. Many of them undergo regular exorcisms to ensure that the influences they encounter in the texts do not take hold of their minds. They know each demon's secret, each forbidden name, and every ritual that can summon or banish malevolent entities. They are guardians of knowledge, but also prisoners of a wisdom that consumes them. During Marco's exorcism, Sister Agatha was crucial in understanding the strength of Asmodeus. She knew that normal rituals would not be enough and found the words to weaken the demon in one of the forbidden texts. But this knowledge comes at a cost. She began to be tormented by nightmares and visions after using the ritual, as though the entity had left a mark on her soul. Such effects are common among Brotherhood members who live between the sacred and the profane. The Vatican knows the risks of maintaining a brotherhood with access to such dangerous texts, but considers it a necessary evil. If this knowledge were to fall into the wrong hands, it could provoke a disaster of incalculable proportions. Yet, Brotherhood members live in constant fear, knowing that a mistaken reading or incomplete ritual could unleash forces they could not contain. It is a responsibility that torments them, but one they bear out of loyalty to faith and the protection of humanity. Over the years, many Brotherhood members lose their strength or go mad. Sister Agatha, despite her vast knowledge, knows she is vulnerable. She feels the weight of the forbidden texts on her soul, and the visions that torment her serve as a reminder that darkness is always lurking. The secrets she guards place her on a path of no return, where each discovery brings her one step closer to the abyss. She knows her faith will be tested to its limits, for the forbidden texts are not merely words, they are windows into absolute evil. Cardinal Salvi is one of the most respected men in the Vatican, known for his steadfastness and devotion. He has always been a staunch defender of the Church and its secrets, but recent events have shaken his faith. From Marco's exorcism to Sister Agatha's inexplicable pregnancy, Salvi has been forced to confront mysteries beyond his comprehension. He is a man who has seen much, but nothing prepared him for the threat he feels emerging from the depths. The decision to thoroughly investigate what happened in the catacombs was not an easy one. Salvi knew that by tampering with these secrets, he might unleash a cascade of unpredictable consequences. But the possibility that the Antichrist might be on the way compelled him to act. He reviewed old archives, sought counsel from the most experienced members of the Brotherhood of Forbidden Texts, and in secret, ordered additional exorcisms in specific locations. His search became an obsession. During his investigation, Salvi uncovered a connection between ancient rituals and the recent strengthening of demonic entities. He realized that the forces of darkness were not merely resisting faith, but seemed to be adapting, finding new ways to infiltrate the world of the living. This understanding threw him into a crisis of faith, as he realized that the Church was not fully prepared to face this new threat. He feared that something was about to escape from the catacombs and challenge the power of the Vatican. Salvi shared some of his findings with Father Mancini, trusting the exorcist to help him unravel the mysteries surrounding the prophetic birth. He believed Mancini was the only one who could face this situation without faltering. However, the more Mancini discovered, the more terrified he became. Both began to feel they were dealing with something far greater than expected, as if an invisible network of forces was organizing in the shadows. The investigation also led Salvi to consider a radical option, sealing the catacombs and forbidding access to the most sacred areas. But this would mean depriving the Church of some of its most powerful artifacts and relics, a risk he hesitated to take. He knew that without access to the ancient chambers, they would lose control over any manifestations that might arise. At the same time, he feared that the continued use of these spaces was feeding the entities trying to escape. In the end, Salvi realized he was fighting against destiny itself, something perhaps written long before his time. With each new detail he uncovered, he felt the weight of an impossible responsibility. How could he protect the church against an evil that seemed greater than God himself? He knew he was facing a spiritual and moral dilemma, and that time was running out. With tears in his eyes, Salvi prayed in silence, seeking an answer that might never come. Sister Agatha's unexpected pregnancy shook the foundations of the Vatican. It was a dark enigma, marked by a series of events that could not be explained by science or faith. Sister Agatha, who had always been devout, had never had any involvement beyond her sacred vows. How then did she carry a life within her? This question echoed through the halls of the Vatican, causing fear and suspicion among those who knew the secret. Those aware of the event quickly associated it with the prophecy of the Antichrist's birth. The Vatican doctors confirmed that she was in an advanced state of pregnancy, though the timing and symptoms did not correspond to a normal pregnancy. For the Church, this suggested a possible sign of demonic intervention. Some speculated that the possession during the exorcism could have planted a malign seed within her womb, but none dared to say this aloud. Silence became the standard response, but that silence was filled with fear, the kind of fear that made even a man of faith question his own beliefs. For Sister Agatha, the horror of not knowing how she had conceived tore her apart from within. She sought answers in her prayers, but the emptiness that answered only deepened her despair. She felt like a burden to the Church, and worse still, as a traitor to her faith. The idea that she might be carrying something against the will of God left her tormented, caught between doubt and revulsion. At times, she would awaken in the middle of the night, feeling movements within her, unsure if they were natural or something far darker. The Vatican, divided over how to proceed, was treating the case with unprecedented urgency. While some argued that the fetus should be removed before it grew further, others insisted that such an extreme measure could prove dangerous. They feared that interfering with the birth might provoke the wrath of hell itself. At the same time, allowing the Antichrist to enter the world seemed an even greater risk. With each meeting, the dilemma intensified, and with it, the weight of an impossible choice loomed. The decision to isolate Sister Agatha was made in secrecy, and few within the Church knew her true condition. Keeping her hidden was a means of protecting both the religious order and humanity, at least until the Vatican decided what to do. Thus, Sister Agatha was placed in a secluded cell, visited only by the most trusted members of the Brotherhood of Forbidden Texts. She herself lived in constant agony, not knowing if her own life would end at the hands of her brothers in faith. The mystery of what was growing in Sister Agatha's womb remained unanswered, a shadow stretching over the Vatican. Each day, the weight of the unknown grew, and doubt gnawed at everyone's certainties. The fear that the Antichrist might indeed be about to be born haunted the Vatican. Every heartbeat of the child she carried seemed like an omen of the end, and as she waited in silence, everyone around her knew that the fate of the Church and of humanity rested on a choice that might condemn them all. The confrontation with Asmodeus in the catacombs was a moment Father Mancini would never forget. Facing the Prince of Lust felt like coming face to face with the very embodiment of evil, and he felt his soul being consumed with each prayer he uttered. The entity fed off the fear of those present, absorbing every hesitation, every doubt. When Asmodeus fully revealed himself, the air thickened, the smell of sulfur filled the room, and the candles went out, leaving everyone at the mercy of an oppressive darkness. In that moment, they all realized they were facing something that transcended any exorcism they had ever encountered. Asmodeus's words were like blades, cutting through the exorcist's faith and mocking each prayer. He laughed, using Marco's voice to speak, claiming that this body belonged to him, that the young man's soul had been taken to a place of no return. With each attempt at exorcism, the demon seemed to grow in power, as though drawing strength from the very ritual. Father Mancini and Sister Agatha watched in horror as they lost control of the situation. Asmodeus's fury intensified, and he made it clear he wouldn't leave without destroying them all. Holding St. Peter's relic, Mancini tried to contain the demon, but Asmodeus was cunning, attacking the faith and sanity of everyone around him. He knew each person's fears and regrets, using this knowledge as a weapon. At one point, he flung a guard against the wall, killing him instantly. Sister Agatha, terrified, was thrown to the ground, and Mancini felt his faith shattering. They were trapped there, with no visible way out, and the demon laughed, declaring that this place would become his domain. Asmodeus's wrath was not merely a display of power, but a personal vendetta against the church and its symbols. He accused the exorcists of hypocrisy, of believing their prayers could keep him at bay. He vowed that each of them would come to know true despair and that God's light could not protect them. At that moment, Mancini realized they were not only confronting a demon, but also their own fears and weaknesses. Every word from Asmodeus was a provocation, a call for them to surrender. With one last effort, Mancini attempted to seal the demon using the circle of protection. He and Sister Agatha, both exhausted and nearly hopeless, recited the words of the ritual together. The relic's light shone one last time, and for a moment, it seemed Asmodeus was weakening. But the demon resisted, unleashing a deafening roar that made the room's walls tremble. The intensity of the battle was destroying not only Marco's body, but also the souls of the exorcists. It was a spiritual war, and they were at their limit. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Asmodeus was forced to retreat. The relic glowed, and a sepulchral silence filled the room. Marco collapsed, seemingly lifeless, and the room lay shrouded in a sinister twilight. Mancini and Agatha, though exhausted, realized something had changed. The power of Asmodeus seemed to have been contained, but he left one last warning. His revenge was not over. He would return, and with him, he would bring something even more terrible. Mancini knew then that this confrontation was only a prelude to something far greater. After Marco's exorcism and the confrontation with Asmodeus, Father Mancini was no longer the same. He had always possessed unwavering faith, believing his work as an exorcist to be a sacred mission, but the encounter with the Prince of Lust shook his deepest convictions. The intensity of the experience and the demon's power brought forth doubts he had never considered. Mancini began to question whether, indeed, his faith was strong enough to face true evil. The Vatican, which had always been his refuge, now seemed dark and distant. Each day, Mancini felt his faith crumbling. He relived the confrontation with Asmodeus in his dreams, waking with the weight of a guilt he couldn't name. The demon's words, mocking his belief, echoed in his mind like a poison. He wondered if perhaps faith was insufficient against the kind of darkness he had faced. Mancini sought solace in prayer, but even that felt in vain. The emptiness he felt was profound, like an open wound that wouldn't heal. Doubt corroded his spirit, and he began to distance himself from others. Isolated, he spent hours reflecting on what had happened in the catacombs, reliving each moment, each decision, trying to find something that would justify the failure. He questioned whether God was truly by his side, or if he had been abandoned in that dark room. Mancini felt that, despite all his efforts, he might no longer be worthy of bearing the weight of an exorcist. Guilt and shame slowly consumed him. To the Vatican, it was evident that Father Mancini had changed, but few understood the depth of his crisis of faith. With each mission, he hesitated more, and the demons seemed to sense this, attacking him with increasing force. He knew his fragility was an invitation for evil to grow stronger. Mancini lived tormented, knowing that without complete faith, his life and soul were at risk. The fear he now carried was a poison, and he could feel his resistance weakening each day. His relationship with Sister Agatha had changed as well. They had shared a traumatic experience and now shared a mutual understanding, but also an emotional distance. She sensed that Mancini was on the verge of collapse, but he closed himself off more and more. The priest, who had once been a pillar for others, now found himself lost, unsure of how to find his way back. He felt he had failed God, the church, and himself. Deep down, Mancini knew his only option was to confront the truth he had been avoiding. He needed to face his own faith to know if he was still capable of continuing. The spiritual battle unfolding within him was silent, yet as brutal as the confrontation with Asmodeus. He knew that if he did not win this internal struggle, he would lose his essence. And perhaps, in losing his faith, he himself would become vulnerable to the forces he had sworn to combat. While the Vatican kept Sister Agatha in isolation, the fate of the child she carried became an increasingly urgent matter. The Church's most experienced members debated endlessly about what should be done. Allowing the birth was risky, but eliminating the child was something few could accept. The possibility that the baby was the Antichrist terrified everyone, but there was still hope that he might be born free of demonic influence. Doubt divided the clergy, creating a profound conflict between faith and pragmatism. With each passing day, the child grew within Sister Agatha's womb, and the Vatican monitored every movement, every heartbeat, searching for signs that might reveal its true nature. Many of the religious figures involved avoided facing Sister Agatha directly, fearing what she might be carrying. This mystery became an unbearable weight, and even the doctors overseeing her pregnancy showed signs of discomfort and apprehension. The Vatican feared that by allowing the birth, they might be unleashing a malignant force beyond control. Sister Agatha, meanwhile, tried to maintain her composure, but sensed that something unusual was growing inside her. She would wake in the middle of the night, feeling her body heavy and her mind disturbed by dark dreams. In these visions, she saw herself surrounded by shadows whispering ancient and unknown words. She felt increasingly distant from the life she once knew, and a profound loneliness consumed her. She knew she was regarded with suspicion, but the worst part was having no answers about what was happening within her. As time passed, the Vatican made a decision. If the baby showed any signs of demonic influence upon birth, it would be immediately taken from Sister Agatha and isolated. They would attempt to raise it in secrecy, keeping it under the watchful eye of exorcists and monks trained to detect signs of possession. However, this choice brought with it a moral dilemma. How could they treat a child as a threat before it had even shown any inclination toward evil? The issue grew increasingly complex, and the Vatican hesitated, uncertain if they were making the right choice. Some priests believed that the birth itself would be a test for the Church. If the child truly was the Antichrist, then the Vatican would have to face it. But if it were an innocent, it could be a divine blessing. For these religious figures, the birth was a test of faith, a challenge that would force the Church to confront its own dogmas and limits. Yet the fear that they might be dealing with something far beyond their understanding and power left many with deep reservations. The fate of the child remains an unanswered question, a dilemma haunting the Vatican and Sister Agatha alike. As the day of birth approaches, the tension rises, and all await with dread what the future will bring. They know that whatever choice they make could change the destiny of the Church and the world. The birth of this child will be the decisive moment, a pivotal event that, for some, may herald the beginning of a new era, either of light or of darkness. Asmodeus's final words echoed constantly in Father Mancini's mind, and in the minds of all who had witnessed the confrontation. "This is only the beginning," he had said, his voice filled with hate and conviction. For Mancini, those words were no empty threat, but a dark prophecy, foreshadowing an even greater darkness to come. The battle against the Prince of Lust had been terrifying, but the sense that even more powerful forces were lying in wait left him with a heavy heart. Asmodeus's warning had become a ghost haunting him. Theologians in the Vatican began studying ancient scriptures and forbidden texts, searching for any clues as to what Asmodeus might have planned. Among the scholars, there was a growing unease, as every fragment they uncovered seemed to indicate that the spiritual world was on the verge of upheaval like never before. In whispered conversations, some speculated that other princes of hell might be awakening. The notion of a demonic uprising raised the possibility that hell itself was preparing for something monumental. Some members of the Brotherhood of Forbidden Texts reported disturbing dreams and visions following Marco's exorcism. In their meditations, they saw darker shadows, accompanied by whispering voices promising vengeance and chaos. For the guardians of the catacombs, the atmosphere in the Vatican had changed. They felt that the daily rituals of protection were becoming less effective, as though the malevolent presence was now an intrinsic part of the place. Many began to fear that the exorcism itself had weakened the boundary separating the world of the living from that of the dead. Cardinal Salvi, who had always maintained a firm stance, now carried a visible tension in his gaze. He knew Asmodeus's words were no mere taunt. As someone with access to the Church's oldest records and darkest secrets, he knew stories of demons who had tried, in other eras, to penetrate the Vatican's barriers. But now, he feared that Asmodeus himself had created a breach impossible to seal. The chambers and crypts no longer felt secure, and the cardinal increasingly felt powerless against forces he didn't fully understand. In secret, the Church began to take extreme measures to reinforce its defenses. New purification rituals were instituted, and exorcists from other regions were summoned to increase vigilance. But the sense that something terrible was approaching did not abate. For many, it felt as if the Vatican was preparing for a battle they knew they could not win. Mancini, troubled, questioned whether the Church's faith and strength would be enough to withstand the evil he sensed drawing near. Asmodeus's words resounded in his mind like a curse destined to echo eternally. The certainty that something greater and more dangerous was still to come tormented everyone who had been present. Mancini felt that, despite having fought with all the faith he possessed, The Vatican was merely on the brink of an event that would change everything. Asmodeus's final words, his laughter, and the shadow of his promise loomed over the Vatican like a dark cloud. And in silence, everyone understood that the true nightmare was yet to be revealed.